of our Earth Exchange Café. So I invite us to sit back and invoke the imagination and imagine that we are stepping through the door of our absolute favorite cafe, the cafe that we go to when we know we're going to have good conversation, the best coffee or milkshake or tea that you love the best, and baked goods are just delicious. But not only that, around you now are books and magazines of people who've been to this cafe before, and there's transcripts of amazing conversations. There's music playing on an old record player from people who've been in this cafe. And we know that as we take our absolute favorite seat with our most favorite patterns on the tapestries all around us, that we're in for another beautiful conversation, this time between Trebi, LaUra, and I. And so as you enter in, I would invite you to sit down with your favorite drink, something to keep you warm and cozy. And as you do, we first just give thanks to the spirits of our ancestors, of the earth, of the air, of the fire that warms us, and the waters that flow inside us, that give us our emotions, that give us our creativity, that give us our passion, that give us our sense of grief, that give us an intention, and also the blessed earth that holds us. And so, without further ado, I invite us to welcome LaUra to our conversation. And Trebi, over to you to introduce LaUra.
Thank you, Harriet. That's beautiful, as always. Yes, we're very, very happy to have LaUra Schmidt here and a conversation with her incredible work. LaUra is the co-founder, along with Aimee Lewis-Reau, of the Good Grief Network, which has become very, very well renowned and acclaimed over the last few years, very short time, actually. And it's 10 steps to resilience and empowerment in a chaotic climate. That's their program. LaUra is a truth seeker, a community builder, a cultural critic, trainer, program designer, and facilitator. She is the granddaughter and grandniece of Holocaust survivors, and so she has long been captivated by the human condition. She describes herself as a lifelong student, curator, and practitioner of personal and collective resilience strategies. LaUra grew up in Michigan, where she now lives, and graduated with a BS in Environmental Studies, Biology, and Religious Studies. Her MS is in Environmental Humanities. Next month, in fact, I believe it's August 8th, LaUra's and Aimee's book will be released by Shambhala Publications, and it is called How to Live in a Chaotic Climate, 10 Steps to Reconnect with Ourselves, Our Communities, and Our Planet. We're going to talk to LaUra about all of these things and more, and we welcome you, LaUra, to Earth Exchange Cafe.
Thank you, Trebi, and thank you, Harriet. I'm really grateful to be here. Big fan of your work, Trebi, for a long time.
Yeah, mutual. It's definitely mutual. So I want to just start out by talking about the Good Grief Network. It's not that old a program, a process, an organization, a book. It's all of those things, and yet it's really taken off. Your work has been covered in CBS News, Time Magazine, the New York Times, to name but a few. So clearly, you and Aimee have tapped into a need that people are eager to respond to. What is it that you think the Good Grief Network answers for people that has not been answered before?
Yeah, great question. I like that you said that we're tapping into a need. And I think that sometimes many of us don't even know we have that need. It's almost like a calling many of us have that we don't know how to fulfill in other ways. Like, we want to be in community with other people. We want to talk about our fears regarding the state of the world. We want to talk about things that alarm us and that keep us awake at night. We want to talk about what the future world might look like, and there aren't very many places to do that, or at least I hadn't found very many places to do that. excuse me, and you read my bio, I was an environmental studies student and a biology student. And so I very much was understanding the implications of these big reports, the IPCC reports, and all like what is coming and what's coming faster and faster. And oftentimes I'd try to bring it up into conversation with my friends or my family or just colleagues. And they're like, oh, LaUra, like bringing that up again. And my perspective was like, we absolutely need to be talking about this all the time. We need to be bringing it into conversation because that's the world that we're living in. And the projected world is very terrifying. And I can't be alone with this amount of fear, this amount of overwhelm. And if I'm feeling that, I imagine there are others out there feeling that. And so it started just as a space to get real about the problems, which is a term that Susie Moser, the adaptation professional, uses. We need to get real about what we're facing and what's happening. And then with that, how do we still arrive to places that cultivate joy and meaning and all the things that we want to feel and that bring us really alive, even in crisis.
So you have 10 steps, and people can read about that on your website. But you might maybe you go through just to name them, and they basically they start out with awareness or acceptance, and then they end up with action. And I wonder if you could tell us a story, like obviously without naming names or breaking confidentiality, but tell us a story about one person's process through this, through these steps.
Yeah. Well, to name the steps, you're right. It starts with acceptance, accept the severity of the predicament. And then we move into being with uncertainty. We honor our mortality and the mortality of all. We do inner work, and this is where we talk about the importance of feeling all of our feelings and doing our trauma work. We develop awareness of biases and perceptions. What stories are we telling ourselves? What lenses are we seeing through that are keeping us from seeing the reality of the outside world or the possibilities of the outside world? We take breaks and rest. We also practice gratitude, create connections, and seek joy. And then we go into what it means to show up. And actually, before showing up, we have to honor the fact that we are causing harm ourselves just by living in these systems that cause harm. So we do hold space for grieving the harm we've caused and acknowledge the complexity of being people who want to minimize harm, and yet we're stuck in a world full of impossible choices. And then we go to showing up, and what that means, the cultivation of personal boundaries. In somatics, they often teach that our body learns on a yes and our body leans forward on a yes. And so much of the climate catastrophe is about things we can't do, things we're losing, things that are no's. And so trying to cultivate spaces for yeses is critical in these times. And then after that, we get to the meaningful action part. And I think what's important to note about this methodology is that for those of us who feel great overwhelm and great fear, we want to rush into action. Joan Baez has like the antidote for, what is it? The antidote for fear or something. The antidote for despair is action, to paraphrase that quote. But I think that if we rush right into action just to try to get rid of these overwhelming and painful feelings, that we're just perpetuating the same cultural conditions that got us into the mess in the first place. So the program is really trying to get us to look inward and to assess the questions that we're all carrying and our conditions, our conditioning that we're carrying, and then kind of leave that at the door and see what possibilities open up if we're allowing ourselves to be authentic and vulnerable, if we're allowing ourselves to do the work and to reconnect to ourselves, each other, and the planet as a whole. And to do that in community and know that we're not the only ones doing this work, like what kinds of ideas and what kinds of possibilities emerge if I'm sharing my ideas and my excitement in a group full of other people who are really concerned. And I think I'll just kind of summarize the arc, not just point out one person, but the idea is that the people looking for a support group, entering into the space of a support group is really difficult. Like you don't go to a support group because everything in your life is going fine and great. You go to a support group because maybe you don't know how to keep living the way that you've been living, or you've had a worldview collapse and things are really hard, and maybe your overwhelming feelings are just too much. And so what happens from the very first step, from step one, is the reduction of isolation, saying like, whew, I'm feeling this overwhelm. I'm not the only one though, this person is. And you start to see your story mirrored in other people. And already that forms a connection. You know, our mirror neurons are firing with each other, and we're starting to feel like it's not just us, which I think this dominant culture makes us feel like this is a very individualized problem. And if we're feeling bad about it, we've done something wrong. And so it really is removing that isolation, preparing people with tools and skills and connections so that they can do the meaningful action that they feel called to do in these times.
Yeah, it's really incredible. I mean, and it just has that such a beautiful flow, which not only takes in the despair, but how do we take a break? How do we find joy in something simple? You know, how do we take action in a way when it's timely to take action, rather than just because it's a way of not feeling bad, you know? And so, yeah. So, as I mentioned when we were first meeting here before we actually started the cafe conversation today, this summer, July 6th, was said by scientists to be the hottest date in human history. We've seen so many calamities all over the world. Last year, there were a lot. This year, it's worse. It's not going to get better. So how has Good Grief Network changed in response to all that, if at all? And if not, certainly how have the people who come to your programs, what's the difference in the temperament or the sense of urgency or whatever of people who come now?
Ooh, big question.
Feel free to split it out into as many directions as you'd like.
Well, the first thing that I'm thinking is that when my wife and I started Good Grief Network, we thought it would stay really small, and we thought it would just be a program that would help us kind of maintain our own community in a very small place. And as soon as we ran through our first 2 pilot groups, we got the feedback of like, this is big and this is important and this is going to help more people. It's not just you and your community, but how do we start scaling this? And it's taken us a lot of years to answer that question, and we're still trying to answer that question. But I can tell you that Aimee and I just wrapped up a 12-week training program. We call it our Flow Facilitation Program, where we sat with 45 people around the world who want to bring this program either to help Good Grief offer more offerings or to bring it to their own communities. And so what we're trying to do is empower people, not to fix other people, not to stand as a therapist or a mental health healer, because that's not what we do, but we're space holders. We allow space for those dark, heavy feelings that come up that we maybe don't know how to sit with, or we've not been taught culturally or in our families to sit with. And so how we're trying to respond to these times is really helping other people help us offer this kind of modality in the world and in their communities. Were you going to say something, Trevi?
No, I mean, I just wonder how part of that question that I asked, that long involved question, was how have the people who are attending the programs, I mean, have you noticed any shift in how they arrive with everything that's been happening?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think the perception that so many people hold on to is like, oh, I'm going to this like depressing support group and we're gonna talk about the really hard things and focus only on the like negative things about the world. But around step 4 or 5, you see the group cohesion really take over, because you're meeting every week. You know, we meet once a week, week after week after week. And after that 4th or 5th meeting, people start looking forward to seeing each other. And so it's like, oh, Trevi's back again, or Harriet's back again. I love when they're in this space. They offer so much insight. And then people start laughing and rediscovering their joy and realizing that like, it doesn't have to be all about what we're losing. We need to create space for the joy and for the pleasure and for the things that sustain us as human beings. And the reason that we're alive is connection. And we start to embody that connection together. And so even within 4 or 5 weeks of meeting, we see that happen. And then toward the end, we do a little bit of a radical imagining exercise, and we do it in community. So we call it a co-visioning exercise as well. And we just kind of talk about what are the things that are worth preserving in this culture? You know, what are the things that are working and that we want to see moved forward? And of course, there are many other cultures that have lots of life-sustaining relationships, and they know how to be in relationship with the planet Earth and with each other. And so what are the things that we could cultivate and nourish? And the second question we explore as a group are, what are things we can leave behind? Like, what are things that aren't working, that have caused harm, that are causing hate, that are sowing division? What things like that need to be left behind? And then the third question that we ask people is like, what is the quality within you that you want to see reproduced? What are you carrying forward? You know, is it your integrity? Is it your humor? Is it, I can't even think of a third example right now, but like, what is it within you that deserves to be carried forward? And we also try to get people to really commit to meaningful action while exploding what meaningful action means. A lot of the meaningful action that we're taught is top down. You have to contact your politicians, you have to attend a protest, you have to vote with your dollar and, you know, buy green things, and then the world will change with those things. But all of those leave us feeling really agentless. And the problem that most people come into our spaces with is that the magnitude of the crisis is so big that they don't know how to get back their agency. They're like, I've tried attending protests, I've tried contacting my politicians, I've tried buying everything green that I possibly can, and nothing's changing. What you're telling me doesn't track. And so we try to get it back into this formula of where your skills and your passions and your experience meet in service of growth, healing, and connection. And like, that's kind of your superpower. And like, what are you called to do? Because what Treby's called to do is different than what Harriet's called to do, and what LaUra's called to do is different. And yet if the three of us come together and do our things, we can actually get somewhere, instead of me having to do everything, Harriet having to do everything, and Treby having to do everything.
Right. Yes, it was really interesting. So there's a Finnish philosopher and environmentalist named Panu Pikala. You know, yes, I figured you probably knew who he was. And I've been reading his work lately, and he has it's a kind of, well, he cites Good Grief Network in all of the things that he writes about, and Radical Joy for Hard Times. But he talks about how every now and then we do need to take a break from our awareness, you know, and when it's not taking a break from awareness, or it's when it's in opposition to awareness, you know, we call it denial. And I think that's seems to be part of the Good Grief Network as well, right? Like I just can't deal with this at all right now. I have to turn my back on it. What's your response to that idea?
Well, in trauma recovery, they use the term titration. Kind of like you're allowed to let a little bit at a time and then come back to resourcing yourself, and then you let a little bit more in. I think the inundation by the news and by the media and by our social media is really overwhelming. And so it has to be a part of our strategy to fortify ourselves, to kind of turn that stuff off for a little while. And it doesn't mean that we're forgetting that these problems exist, but it does mean that maybe instead of attending the protest today, I'm feeling not nourished, I'm feeling like I don't have very much energy, but I'm going to go talk to a tree, or I'm going to go stand in the river and like connect with the elements of the earth, or I'm going to take my dog for a walk or go play with my dog at the park. Like, there are multiple ways to nourish ourselves, but being hyper focused on the predicament all the time is a surefire way to burn out, and then just make us unpleasant people to be around, because we're going to be so activated and so agitated and so irritated that we're going to start lashing out at the ones we love and our partners and our friends. And so we do have to kind of titrate. We have to let a little bit in, come back to what sustains us, why we do this work, what our passions are, what we love, go back and do some of the work, and then come back. You know, I think all of these answers are just both and.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, a recent example is I was reading an article about the decline in so many bird species because of climate change. And I had to read a little bit and stop, and read a little bit and stop. And I couldn't finish the article until maybe about the fifth time I picked it up. And that just had to be the way it was. I want to ask you about your own personal journey to this. I mean, you say in your bio, you're the granddaughter and grandniece of Holocaust survivors. You came to this realization about what you needed to do in your life kind of slowly. What was that journey like? I mean, who were you as a little kid? And then how how did all of that evolve into what you are now and what you're writing and teaching and thinking?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Trevi. I come from a tremendous amount of tumult in my early life. And so I had a lot of abuse, a lot of neglect. My home was repossessed at a pretty early age. And then in addition to that, I lost two of the people I love dearly, two of my friends within a year of each other. And so just growing up in that amount of chaos, I just shut everything down emotionally, which is a very wise embodied tactic to survive so much tumult. And I started thawing a little bit later when I moved on to college and had a little bit more stability. And this is the same time I befriended Aimee. Aimee and I have been friends since our early 20s. And she would just ask me questions like, do you really want to live this way? Do you really want to keep going this way? Like just emotionally shut off. And it took me a while to understand that actually we can't selectively mute our emotions. Brene Brown teaches this a lot. Like if I didn't want to feel all of the pain and all of the depression. I didn't want to have to deal with my anxiety. And so I just muted it, numbed out, but also with it mutes the ability to be present. It mutes the ability to feel joy, to feel connected, to actually feel the love coming in. And so then you start repeating the patterns of harm, and I didn't want to live that way. And so I put myself into an adult children of alcoholics meeting quite young, saw the kind of healing that takes place. Therapy has been a godsend, but you have to be able to have access to healthcare and to be able to afford therapy for that modality to be of service. And just started asking questions of like, okay, if I'm coming from a bunch of tumult in my young life, and I put myself through college and put myself through grad school, and I have a moment where I can start to breathe and start to form new patterns, how do I want to be and what do I want to practice as the world continues to be chaotic? Like I have some agency over how I want to live my life. And so a lot of it was about practicing. A lot of it was about undoing, unlearning, repatterning, and just realizing that life is so much sweeter if we can take in the joy and the pain. If we can metabolize that grief, if we can metabolize the pain that we have been given, and all of us have pain in different ways. And many of us want to run from it because it hurts. It's excruciating, it shuts us down. And we were just on a call with a facilitator earlier right before this, and she talked about how one of the gifts the 10-step gave her was that if she dared to venture into her pain, she learned she would not get stuck there, and that her body actually knows what to do with it, and she can return to things like joy and love and connection.
Oh,
and
wow.
So it's pretty much the pathway that got me there is like, we have agency over how we want to spend our lives. Do you want to be depressed and under-resourcing yourself and not experiencing joy, or do you want to touch the joy and touch the light and touch the things that are still beautiful in the world? And I chose the latter.
Good. Thank you. Thank you for choosing the latter. Harriet, I want to let you, do you have some questions for LaUra? Let's go over to you.
Well, just following it on Facebook, as yet nobody's commented or put any questions up. So this is coming straight from me, and it's a reflection of what you're saying, and just a sort of realization, which is probably really simple, but looking at how culturally there seems to be a lot of wounded people walking around doing wounding things. That there's the old adage, traumatized people traumatize people, and how when we're burnt out, everything can potentially be just like afterwards you just think, oh God, why did I say that? Or why did I buy that? Or what was I doing? Why did I get myself to that point where I was so much in pain that I then did some really damaging things? And I actually think it's just hit me that there's something very, very beautiful about when we go to these wounded sites and we watch this perfection of natural succession, as you'll be a biological understanding, where things just naturally cover over. Mother Earth knows how to heal. And there's something so pure about that. And then in the human experience of burnout, and the culture is just really overwhelming, and that sort of perpetual damaging. But when stepping back, when taking that time, when breathing, when being in community that can say to you, that's okay, where our central nervous system can relax, then our actual behavioral patterns become wholesome and they become potentially healing. And I just wonder, just if you can expand a little bit about that experience of when burnout, when crisis, makes us do these things, whether we want to or not, with all we've got a lot of pressure on our shoulders, but our boss is saying we've got to do this, so we've got to do it. Or my family says I've got to do this, so we better do that. So how could your, the 10 steps help with that kind of sort of the damage that's done because we're under so much strain?
Yeah, well, and the cultural conditions of oppression and exploitation that dominate all of us in the Western world to different extents, depending on the bodies that we're living in and the socioeconomic status that we're living in. It's also a great question, Harriet. Thank you. I'm coming back to the invitation that I believe the 10 steps provides as to whether we are reacting or responding. Because reacting means that our triggers are engaged, that we've not been allowed to heal. We've not been afforded the space or the resources to heal. And so we have to react because it's in our best, like, if we're perceiving it as the way that we are going to be safe. And so whether or not we like that response sometime in the past has made us safe. And so our bodies remember it, our somas remember it and say, I'm going to store this reaction for when this happens again, and it's going to keep me safe time and time again. But if we don't have time to unpack that response, we're always going to use that response in future threats to our safety. A lot of what we need to do right now, and a lot of why I'm drawn to somatics as a healing modality, is it really tries to incorporate choice and responsiveness. Instead of saying we always have to react this way, we always have to do it this way. Like, what if we could pause? And what if we could really discern what's actually happening here, not as our wounded selves, but as our resource selves, and then move from that spot. The thing is that so many of us, you named it, like we have pressures from our boss, we need to pay our bills, we need to do this, we need to do this. And so that, like, we've created a culture where there's not time or even energy to heal from the magnitude of trauma that's coming at us, or that maybe we gathered in our early life. But certainly the climate trauma is just going to be exacerbated. So how do we etch out the time and the space in our lives and as communities to start creating more opportunity for responsiveness instead of that reactivity? And when the reactivity causes not all of them, but a lot of harm, perpetuates the harm.
So you mentioned just now your resource self, it's very interesting. Could you elaborate a little bit more about who is the resource self, and how does this particular self find those resources and act upon them?
Yeah, so everybody's resources are different. And these are kind of the things, I think Deb Dana would say, these are the things that help us return to a sense of okayness. And so maybe sipping a cup of tea, or sitting next to a body of water, or maybe you have a tree that you really like and you go to and you sit at its roots, or maybe throwing the ball for a dog. Deb Dana has kind of like a who, what, where formula for resourcing. Where are the places that you feel calm and safe and collected? Who are the people who, when you spend your time around them, you feel this sense of calm, you feel this sense of safety? What are the times of day? Is it morning when you're sipping your coffee and you're just having that time to yourself? Is it in the evening before bed when you're doing your rituals? I think also resourcing ourselves is our daily practices. Are we engaging in meditation or journaling? Are we moving our bodies? What are we committing to every day so that these feelings don't get stuck and we're developing a relationship with ourselves and potentially the natural world? Those kinds of things help us be our resource. That was hard to say, resourced selves. But I think it's important to note that we can't live in that resource position 100% of the time. It's a practice of getting back to that and relying on those resources. It's a practice of remembering they even exist.
Can I ask a question then, maybe sort of jumping to the end where there's the 10th step, which is moving into action. And I would imagine that people listening to this will have an interesting relationship with action, because Radjoy is very much about being in relationship, and it is about resourcing because you're in a communication with a landscape that's difficult, rather than litter picking and chaining yourself to the gates to try and enact some change. But eventually it often leads to that. So with your, thank you so much for sharing your family history. There's a lot about, especially, Glenn Albrecht with his work at the coal mine. Sometimes we can't be resourced. We can't be our perfect resourced version of ourselves. And yet action is calling us. And can you speak a little bit about where action can coincide with the steps and be part of, if at all, or whether it's part of a cycle? How does it stand? How can you be in action and also all the other things that you have to do to be on the journey, as it were?
Yeah, I mean, I would even say identifying your resources and starting your daily practices are action, like meaningful action. And this is why I said earlier that like we're really trying to explode or expand the definition of meaningful action. Is like it doesn't always have to be about shutting down the mine. It doesn't always have to be about being on the front lines. And in fact, Joanna Macy mapped out a really great action types of action for us. The ones that we conventionally think of as frontline activism or calling our politicians, that's just one type of action. That's holding actions. And they're very important. They're super important because they minimize the harm being done to the earth and to each other. But the second type of action is creating new systems that are life preserving, like new economic systems and new political orders and things like that, like the actual systems that support life. And then the third one is like dreaming up new worldviews and what are our values. And so for me, I think it's the opposite way, that our values and our worldview inform those structures, which then form the holding actions. And I think that almost everything that we do that's in service of growth, connection, or healing, we can put in either holding actions, creating these new structures, or worldview change. And so for me and for Good Grief Network, like in action is doing your work so you're not projecting your fears of the future onto your kids, and that your kids have a chance at being emotionally regulated or stable, or they start to develop a relationship with uncertainty and death and inner work. Like you doing your work is meaningful work because you're helping that next generation learn how to be more nimble and be with uncertainty. And so, planting an organic garden or planting a garden and sharing that surplus food with your neighbors, that's meaningful action. Spending time in the natural world when a place has been wounded and developing a relationship and bearing witness to the growth that happens there. I loved your analogy of succession, because what we can come back to time and time again is that no matter the amount of destruction, something grows back. And like, that's a fundamental truth of this planet, is like, if something gets disturbed, it might take a lot of time. It might take an unfathomable amount of time for our human brains, but something grows, something changes, something evolves in that space. And if we can just stay there long enough to witness the changes and to understand that there are cycles of decay and collapse, and there are cycles of growth and bursts of vibrancy and bursts of diversity. And at some point we have to collapse. Like, that's the natural cycle. It never is going up all the time.
Yeah, and of course, what Radical Joy for Hard Times and Good Grief Network have so much in common is this idea that we have to have the balance. Like, you can't only be immersed in what's wrong, but you also can't ignore what's wrong and leap to what's right. And I remember an early story with the Global Earth Exchange of somebody who went to the Owens Valley in California, where they stole the water more than 100 years ago to bring it to Los Angeles, and tried immediately to find beauty there, and couldn't, because she was just so sad about what was happening. So she had to go to the sadness in order to find the beauty that happened. And that's what your description about the process of the Good Grief Network. People have to start out with all the difficult stuff, and then they start to move on when that's released, when it's shared, when it's heard.
Yeah, Francis Feller teaches us a lot about that grief itself is a transformative process, but like, we have to open to it on grief's terms. Like, we don't get to control the grieving process. The grieving process controls us. And if we're willing to be open to it, we're going to arrive at a fully different place than where we started. And I know that in my bones. When I've learned that lesson, I didn't maybe have the words for it before learning about Francis Weller's work. But I had experienced it because I'd experienced so many losses. It's like grief has its own agenda, grief has its own lessons, and we have to actually be a willing participant to learn those lessons. And so if we go to a wounded place and we want to skip all that grief and we want to skip the harm, we're also skipping the lesson and the potential there. And then if we can make it to the other side of that grief, even though it feels gross and hard and almost like it will collapse us internally, that is where the real beauty and the real joy exists. It's in the process of holding the grief and being with the grief and nurturing the grief, walking with the grief, that we get to open to those really beautiful feelings that we all want to feel more of.
So with your participants in the Good Grief Network, do you find that grief about the earth, about climate change is really interwoven with personal grief? I mean, I was on a conversation this morning with 3 people, one of whom is a woman from Lebanon who's trying to deal with this in the political situation and in the familial situation. And we were talking about, how do these things interact? Are they related to one another? I mean, what kinds of expressions of grief do people bring when they participate in one of the Good Grief Network programs?
Yeah, Trevi, that's a really great question too. Thank you for your thoughtful questions, both you and Harriet. What Aimee and I have seen over the years is that personal grief definitely is an opening into collective grief. We've seen a lot of people come into our spaces after the loss of a loved one, after the loss of a job, after moving someplace and having to start a whole new community. And I think because whether it's individual grief or collective grief, what grief does is it hollows us out. It takes out all the superficialities of the world and just leaves us with rock bottom. And when you're just faced with rock bottom, you start making a lot of questions about how your life had been before, things you could have done differently. Like your eyes are almost like freshly opened. And with that, if it's an individual grief that has leveled us down to this rock bottom, then of course the collective questions are also available to look at and to assess. And so I do think they're intimately related. In our Good Grief spaces, though, we try to make it really clear that we're not here to process the individual grief, because that does require a little bit of a different healing process than what we're equipped for. And we're not therapists. We're space holders. We're peers at the same level. And so if somebody's experiencing really acute grief or really acute depression, maybe they need to work with a healer outside of that space and then come back and join us for touching the collective aspects of it. But they are intimately related for sure.
I want to talk about your book, but Harriet, you have another question.
I was just then going to ask about joy. You know, that there's something so beautiful, and as you mentioned, Francis Weller's the journey of it, and I'm sitting with ritual, you know, and we go through this process of leaving the village, and then we have this container where all of that is safe to dissolve us, you know, that we're so in grief, and you know something happens, then we're put back together, and then we make this journey back to the village, but we bring with us something that's not only a very much more intimate understanding of our grief, but there's something very joyous as well. I wonder whether you could speak a little bit about that.
I agree. I think that's true. Well, and I think the idea here is that when you go and undergo this rite of passage that maybe you're pointing to, when you come back, you also come back with gifts for your community. And in this hyper individualized culture that many of us live in, I think we think rites of passage are to go out and fulfill some sort of self thing or do self-healing. And then we've forgotten that actually the essential part is to bring that gift back to your community. And so that joy that we're carrying with us after we do this really hard thing and after we start practicing healing is a gift for our whole community. And because we know that we're wired to connect, we know our nervous systems are constantly talking to each other, that as we do our own healing work, we're actually being of service to our community just by being the person who's willing to sit with other people in their despair or in their joy. our nervous systems are constantly assessing for cues of safety or danger. And if we're the ones that are coming back, if we're the ones that are doing our work, then our nervous systems are sending the communication to other nervous systems of like, I can hold this for you. I can be here for you. I am a stable person. And so even at the like nervous system level, we can compound our joy. We can spread our joy just by being somebody who is willing to feel it all and to be open to it all.
I just realized something interesting, and that, I mean, I've led wilderness rites of passage programs for 30 years. And only 3 years ago, I started working with veterans, military veterans. And as you say, it has been challenging before I started working with these veterans to have people realize that it's not just about going out and having a brilliant and insightful conversation with the natural world. It's about what you bring back as a result of that. And there has been reluctance. I mean, there has been real reluctance. And what has not happened is that the veterans they come into the program with the expectation that they're going to be a better service to their community in a new way. And it just taps in so well to everything you've been saying about how we have to go to the grief first. Because these veterans, women and men, have been through a lot of trauma before they went into the military, during and after. And I think that has had an opening up kind of result that makes them really want to heal not only themselves, but others, which is, I mean, it just goes to show again how we have to start with we have to really plunge into the grief in order to get out of it.
Yeah, well, and we use so much of our time and our energy and our spaciousness kind of putting off our grief or our fear or our overwhelm more generally. If we can actually face them and move through them and not get stuck in them, as we suggested earlier, like what kind of energy and spaciousness gets freed up, you know, like what are we actually opening to? What kind of creativity might we open to if we're not using all of our energy to suppress those things we don't want to look at?
Mm-hmm. So we want to talk about your book, which is coming out on August 8th. Tell us about your book, how it came about, and what it elaborates on that your programs might not, perhaps.
Yeah, thank you, Trevi. I'll show you the book. I have it right here.
Good.
This is it.
Great.
It's called, you already named it, about how to live in a chaotic climate. And I think the question that we really wanted to explore is how to stay fully alive in the midst of ongoing crises. Like if we actually want to do this human experience and minimize the harm and maximize like connection and fun and joy and pleasure, what does it take? And the book itself maps itself through the 10 steps, but in our programs, the 10 steps are sharing spaces. And so we all come from our personal spaces to share a story about what this step means to us. Excuse me, there's not room for discussion in those spaces, yet the book gives you the theoretical and the sort of philosophical ideas behind each of the steps and why we've crafted them in that way. So it's less of a personal gaze into everybody's insights and everybody's livelihoods, and more of like, well, we need to do this because of this, and we need to accept the severity of the predicament because of this. We have to feel our full range of feelings because of this. We have to do our trauma work because of this. But the fun part and a little bit vulnerable part is that Aimee and I take turns telling personal stories about how we're living this or how we have lived each of the steps. So each of the steps corresponds with a little bit of a personal narrative of either Aimee's or my life. And then sprinkled throughout are just some pieces from our 10-step participants about how this step helped them see the world in a different way. And then we have 2 poems. The book is bookended by poems. Poetry is a very big deal in good grief spaces because it gets us into that liminal space and gets us a little bit comfortable with moving away from logic and moving away from the concreteness that surrounds me in my everyday life. And so we open with a poem from Brooke McNamara and we close from a poem from one of our facilitators. And that pretty much is the structure of the book, but really what we want it to be is a conversation piece. We want, like, you can disagree with the things that we've written in there, and that's fine and a-okay, but please do talk about it. Bring it back to your community and say, well, this is how this sits with me. This is what I think about it. The goal is to just put, and maybe this is true for your books too, Trevi, but the goal is to put something out there that enhances the dialogue and keeps pushing the needle forward and provides just a little bit of solace and support in a time of ongoing disruption.
Yeah, absolutely. So would you be willing to tell us one of your stories from one of the steps?
Oof. Yes. Probably should have been prepared for that.
I just thought of it. I didn't even have it on the list of questions.
It's a good question, but as a new author, I'm totally underprepared. In the meantime, while I'm thinking of this, Trevi, can you tell us a little bit about your newest book that came out? Because I imagine that we have a lot of parallels going on, and I've actually not heard very much about it. So what will you indulge me?
I'm going to speak only briefly because this is your time after all. That's what people are listening to this for. It's called Fierce Consciousness, Surviving the Sorrows of Earth and Self. It started out being about how to live through climate change without falling apart. And then, as you know, my husband died in the middle of actually when I was doing the 10 steps of Good Grief Network. And it expanded into that and how to live with other kinds of grief and trauma. And it's 35 short chapters with kind of quirky, funny, playful titles that are directions, like Fight the Angel and Let Her Win. Get dirty. Find your superpower. No.
That's wonderful. We also have a piece about superpowers.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Good.
It mostly focuses on what I said earlier about this connection of our experience, strengths, and skill sets, and using them in service of connection, growth, and healing. Those are superpowers as we define them, but we do need our superpowers. Like, you have different experiences. Again, Harriet has different experiences and LaUra has different experiences. Imagine a world where we could nurture each other's experiences and rely on each other to do the thing you're really good at and Harriet's really good at. Like, where could we go from there? Super excited to pick up your book.
Well, ditto. Me too.
Yeah,
and not be ashamed of your superpowers, not try to be modest and humble about them, but to really know what they are and put them out there.
Yeah.
So did you think of a story?
I did. Okay. And it's because I brought up the grief of losing my friends a couple times, and so this seems appropriate. And this we start the book with a chapter about community and the absolute necessity of community for a number of different reasons. And I start the chapter by talking about how my friend Kara, she died of cancer. She got cancer when she was 16, and died 17. She lived a little over a year and had a stroke, and it was the first time that I really questioned mortality and really questioned about what fairness is and sickness, and does this happen to kids? And after she died, my friends and I were sitting in our school library, and she died on a Tuesday. And the next Tuesday after she died, we were sitting in the school library, and my friends and I had a conversation, and we're like, do you want to go over to our friend's house? Do you want to just see the parents and kind of ask how they're doing a week out from Kara's death? And our friends agreed. So as soon as the school bell rang, we got in their car and went over to my friend's house, and they embraced us. And what was really beautiful is there were tears, but there was also laughter. And so it's this component, this theme that we keep touching today about going into the grief, but also coming out with this joy or this maybe even lightness. But I just remember Kara's mom, set us out glasses of water, and we got to hear about Kara's last moments in the hospital. But what ended up happening was we came back the next Tuesday and the next Tuesday. And eventually the family started making us meals, and we would share a meal, and then her brothers would come. And then other friends of Kara's would come. I'm getting goosebumps even telling this story, but this tradition happened every Tuesday, and we just called it Tuesdays for 3 years.
Wow.
And I had named to you that one of my other friends died within a year, and she was one of these organizing groups. Her name was Kelly. She was one of the people that came to Tuesdays and organized this. And so actually when she passed away from a car accident, she was killed in a car accident. her family started coming to Tuesdays as well. And so it became a place for us to hold so much grief that, like, what else could you have done with that grief, you know? And to exemplify the amount of grief that has walked alongside me in my life, Kara's mom also passed away from cancer just a number of years after Kara. And then in addition to that, my other organizing friend, Sarah, she died when she was in her early 30s from an unknown heart condition. And so it's like all of these core people that helped me build Tuesdays, the dad, Kara's dad, is left. And so it's like this very special invitation and reminder that, like, what we can't hold as individuals, what we don't know how to touch as individuals, can be held with groups and can be moved through. And we don't have to always focus on the loss. You know, we played games and we chatted, and also there was space to talk about our loved ones. And for any of us who have ever lost somebody that we really, really love, that's all we want to do. All we want to do is talk about that loved one, and people don't want to talk about it with us because they think we're going to get hurt, or, you know, they're going to bring up something bad or trigger us or something. But there's a desperation of, like, no, I want to say their name, and I want to say their name as often as possible because they've etched something into me, and I'm forever changed because of that person. And so that story is in the book, just briefly talking about the importance of community and why we can come together and why we can hold these things that seem like we maybe can't hold elsewhere.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And it really is remarkable. I mean, I've never heard a story like that. And it must have been so extraordinary for Kara was her name? Kara's parents, when you first, like, you know, a few 17-year-old girls. And it's like, it's not a typical teenager thing to do.
Yeah.
It must have been extraordinary. And then it went on for 4 years and encompassed other deaths. But it's a really beautiful story.
Yeah, it got me through my first couple of years of college. I only went to college 15 minutes away from where I grew up, but I'd come home, like, I couldn't do anything on Tuesdays for those first couple of years in college, and just was like, got plans, we're going to do dinner. It really was a special thing that they provided us, and a space they provided us every week.
Well, we have to stop pretty soon. Harriet, do you have another question? Does somebody else from Facebook have a question?
No questions coming up. But again, just a reflection of that. And thank you so much for sharing that. And just puts me to mind of how terrible the general inability to talk about grief and about love. And when you were speaking, I just felt this very strong word. It's about belonging. There's something so beautiful about wanting to speak the person's name and for it to be heard with the body, so that the person that you're saying it with really feels it, and that you feel this kind of belonging. And we belong, but then we go, and that's also part of this, is kind of transient. But the belonging, if we're so incapable of even encouraging belonging, you know, because we're so scared of it all ending, you know. So that story just is really beautiful and really resonates with me so deeply. Thank you so much. Again,
Yeah.
really been beautiful to hear you speak in so many ways.
Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for being interested in Good Grief Network. And it's a gift to be here with you today.
Oh,
Trebi, you're muted.
I want to ask you one more question before Harriet takes us out. How has Good Grief Network changed you, LaUra, over the last few years?
Abby, your questions are amazing.
Curiosity.
It's a good one. It's so good because I do reflect on this quite a bit. I think having a degree in environmental studies, biology, and environmental science, or environmental humanities rather, I was really convinced that there's nothing we can do, and that we're on a trajectory of, like, everything's fucked. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that here, but that was my mentality. That was what I was sitting with, is like, what hope do we have if we've already set off all of these things? And what Good Grief has given me is the opportunity to see the in-between, and to stay in the unknown, and to put my faith in the natural order of life and of the earth and of the cosmos. And every time that I sit with people in 10-step and in the 10-step program, I am renewed. I am inspired. I am reminded that I'm not the only one that sees these problems, and there are so many good-hearted people in the world. And if we look at the news or if we look at the world around us, we're like, nobody cares. Nobody really wants to do this. Maybe we don't want to actually have a heart-centered revolution and change our ways. And time again, Good Grief Network teaches me that that's not true, and that was a notion I had to let go of. Like, there's so much hope in people, and there's so much hope in living open-heartedly and using love as a vehicle to guide our decisions. And that maybe we will all collapse, maybe we'll all go extinct, but that's not for me to know, and I'm not going to carry that. What I'm going to carry is what I can do now, and how I can continue to inspire people in the future, and how we can inspire each other and just be absolutely alive in the present moment. And that is what Good Grief gave me.
It's beautiful. And you are changing the lives of thousands of people all over the world. So that's huge.
And
Yeah.
being changed by thousands of people all over the world. You know, relationship, it's reciprocal.
So thank you to you and Aimee for doing this work. It's incredible.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Harriet, please take us out if you would.
I will. Well, breathing a sigh and knowing that the conversation is now coming to a close, and our drinks are now empty and the fire has died down, and it's time now to think about leaving the cafe. So a final deep moment of gratitude to LaUra Schmidt and Trebi for holding this beautiful conversation. And we thank the spirits of our ancestors, of the earth, the spirits of fire, the spirits of air, the spirits of water, for having held us and guided this beautiful conversation as we've sat in this magical cafe space. And as our imaginal realm dies down and we start shuffling out the door, we say to the last person, don't forget to turn out the light and shut the door. And we leave the cafe for one more month. Actually a little bit longer than one more month, because I think we're having an August break. Is that correct? And then we will meet again.
Actually, no, on August 9th, we have Bridget Hopkins.
That's right. Bridget Hopkins, who created the Imperma Sculptures ritual. So we'd love to talk to her a little bit about her work as well. So join us in a month. But for now, LaUra, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation, and you're welcome back in the cafe anytime you like.
Yes, indeed. Thank you,
Harriet.
LaUra.
Thank you, Trebi.
Thank you,
Appreciate it.
Harriet.